Okay.
I didn't know the podcast was. Hold on, I got to turn this down. Welcome to. Hold on, I got to turn this down.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to On the Blood Trail. My name's Tyler. I'm the host of the podcast. For those of you that have listened before, you know who I am. You've heard some of my stories, and you know the guest that I have on the podcast today. We'll get to that in just a second here. We got just under 2 weeks until Alberta hunting season is like blown wide open. It's actually only 1 week until some zones are already open for archery, and that actually also includes the sheep opener, which is with a rifle, and that's only 1 week away. And then the rest of it just under 2 weeks. It's exciting getting out there, getting the reps in, double, triple, quadruple checking all of our gear. It's exciting. I'm excited. Our guest on the podcast today, I know he's got to be excited. My brother, Ryan, how you doing?
Not too bad, bro. How are you doing tonight?
Not too bad. It's been a little bit. It's funny, hey, because I think this will be podcast number 2 since we talked last, and that was forever ago.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to do this more often. We'll have to maybe start a Slager Outdoors podcast or something too.
Yeah, I'm thinking so.
We talk enough. We might as well record a few of the conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
So how excited are you for upcoming hunting season?
Man, it's just like a kid in the candy shop. You don't know what to pick out or you don't know where to look. Couldn't be any more ecstatic about it. We got our new Hoyt Ventum 30s that we both got. I don't know. I'm stoked. Got some really promising looking spots this year. We'll get into a little bit later in the podcast here, and just stoked.
You took my next question right away from me. I was going to bring up the new bows. What else are you switching up for your setup this year?
Huh. To be honest, I actually don't think really anything. Maybe next to nothing.
New boots.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just for all you Under Armour lovers, I'm wearing some Cameron Hanes boots.
Keep hammering.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I put on those boots and I thought, I don't know if like Cameron Hanes' athletic spirit just came on me. I just wanted to start running. Just get on the closest road, just start booking it.
Cut the sleeves off your shirt and just go. It's all right. I don't mind a lot of what he does. He does a lot of bringing the hunting community together, but a little bit more showy than what I'm used to for sure.
Yeah, no, I don't mind his stuff. It cracked me up, man. No, I got the boots. I didn't even know who he was, to be honest, but I YouTubed it after and I realized pretty quick.
That's awesome. What are the plans for this season?
You know me pretty well. I'm sure the listeners are going to start to learn this about me quite a bit too. I'm a diehard bow hunter. You can't keep me away from, archery season, even in a rifle season, man. I still carry my compound bow into the stand every night. It's the only way that you're going to get animals continuously and successfully with your bow is as being so dedicated and so persistent with it that basically you have to spend like double the time with your bow than you ever would with a gun, if not triple.
And I've always known you to be the person that's done that ever since you started hunting. But like last year, I would say was a pivotal transition point where you really solidified that I want to be a bow hunter all the time over being a rifle hunter.
What's actually funny about that is I maybe would have quit this year, but I actually got some success last year doing it. So it's probably all, it's all fine and dandy now. But if I look back at it from last year, man, if I didn't get some success, it would have been really hard to stick with it again this year. I mean, I'm sure I would have, but maybe not to the same degree.
Well, you had some extreme success last year based on, I think, anybody's standards, especially for hunting one state or province on its own. Even, you did shoot a deer in Arizona. So, I mean, that kind of is continued success. Unless you want to, well, that was before Christmas or after Christmas?
That was just after. That was before the new year, though.
Still 2020 season. So that was pretty awesome.
Yep.
That you got to cap off an excellent archery season with a southern buck.
Man, I remember we all go to the watering hole And everyone's sitting there like, what kind of buck do I want? They're all thinking, oh, I want a 4x4. I want this or that. And I'm just like, man, if it's got more than 1 point on one side, I'm killing it.
You're ready to shoot an Arizona 11 pointer.
Exactly. Well, that was just it. Like, I didn't know what kind of time I had. I didn't know how many opportunities I was going to be given. So I wasn't going to pass up or blow any opportunities that I got. And, I was rewarded with that with a really nice 4 corn coos.
Now, you did slip up once in the 2020 season. And I mentioned this on the last podcast. And I also said that I would ask you this story so that the listeners could hear it from you. But your mule deer. Now, I know you sat a few times. I sat with you and watched you miss a really nice buck. You probably wouldn't have scored super high, but with a bow in the frigid temperatures, that would have been an extreme trophy. But then
Yeah.
you did end up shooting one with a gun.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the truth. When we sat that day with the one with the bow that I missed, you remember we were walking into the stand and I look over to my left and like 70 yards in the trees, there's the buck. He's just standing there in the trees watching us walk into the tree stand. And I'm just like, well, I can't shoot him here. He's too far in the brush and you're not going to get him to come any closer and you're not going to get any closer. So we just kept going right to the tree stand, which was about 200 yards further up. We get in the tree and I remember it's on camera. I was like, there's no way that buck's stupid enough to watch us walk all the way into our tree, then walk right to the base of it, right?
He was
Well,
love struck.
sure enough, he did, man. That buck was so heavy in the rut, snort wheezing, paw on the ground, posturing every 4 corn that come out, chasing the one doe that was in the entire valley.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey?
But yeah, no, anyways. So when he did finally come out at 40 yards where I had a clear shooting lead, I come to full draw. It was what, minus 25, minus 30 that day?
It was
That's in
bad.
Celsius. It was frigid temperatures, really difficult conditions. At that time, I was still shooting my Hoyt Carbon Spider. That bow had seen thousands upon thousands of arrows go through it. My QAD draw, it would be a QAD Ultra Rest, right?
Yeah.
It was so worn out, man, that when it came to full draw, it made the dirtiest click when it come to full like max click. And I was like, oh, I made so much noise. And the deer looked up and couldn't get my anchor point because I had one of those like beaver style hats on.
Yeah, I remember.
And when you don't got your anchor point, man, in the video, you'll see you miss feet wide.
Yeah, and that cold temperatures, it just complicates everything.
It honestly makes, when you are successful in that kind of cold temperature, it makes for, I don't know, the trophy just seems so much larger than it actually is.
Well, it was one of those days too where like the sun was beating down and the sun was warm, and we had hiked all the way up the tree edge to get to our stand. And by the time you got up to the stand, you're so bundled up, you're sweating, and then you completely stop moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sun goes down and you're just ice cold. And then, of course, that's when all the animals come out and you're trying to make a perfect shot in these less than perfect conditions.
And what most people don't realize is negative 30 in a tree stand may as well be negative 50.
It's
In a
bad.
ground blind, negative 30 is not that bad. You're sitting on a comfy little lawn chair. Maybe you got your little buddy heater in there. You're in a much cozier, warmer environment. You're blocked from the wind. I remember that particular night, the wind was howling right at your face and at the back of my neck.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you were standing it, because hitting the back of my neck, man, I was about ready to become a popsicle. But I remember when he finally came out, I was shaking so hard. Oh, and you remember how loud the tree stands were in negative 30? They had that sun had kind of melted them. They were still kind of freezing. Oh, it was bad. Every time you make a move, it's just clink and clank.
Yeah, I think we could describe it like on and on and on. There's just so many things that made it more difficult, including the fact that like in that temperature, you can't even barely take out your phone, check the time, send a text to somebody about anything because your fingers don't work.
Yeah, and if you do finally get a text off, you've lost half your battery on your phone.
Exactly. And your fingers are numb. So then when a deer comes out and he's within bow range and you're trying to get your release all set up and get all this tiny little precision figured out, it's so much more difficult.
It's difficult because I only shoot my bow generally when I have nothing on my head. Like that day, it was so cold, I wouldn't take my beaver toque kind of thing going on. I couldn't take it off. I was too cold. But I
Mm-hmm.
take my gloves off and usually my toque. And usually I just wear a hat. Like if you watch my whitetail video from last year, I shot in October. It was about -5 to -10 that sit, and I had no gloves on and no toque on that night. So that night I was locked and ready to go. But for some reason, man, I couldn't do it that night with the mule deer. It was just I was too cold.
That cold air just set in and it overtook the situation. But
Yeah,
now going into this new season, how sweet is that new Hoyt?
man, it really is a treat to shoot it. As long as I can keep myself under control, that Hoyt will do anything I need it to do. I know that. I trust fully in it. I have the confidence in that bow.
I know mine outshoots me by far. I've never
Yep,
grouped so well with a bow. And it's funny because I was talking to dad the other day and he's going on about how I probably only feel this way about the bow because it's brand new and I want to make myself feel like my new investment is paying off immediately. But the
of
truth of it
course.
is this thing is making me a better shot.
Yeah, yeah, no, hands down. Like I shot, I want to say probably about half a dozen rounds at 40 yards tonight. And eventually I give up because the wasps were just trying to kill me. But every group I took, man, even the groups that were not good and the ones I weren't focusing on, you could pretty much wrap your hand around any group, any given group. And at 40 yards, that can be extremely difficult to do to discipline yourself to shoot consistently 4 to 5 inch diameter rounds.
Definitely. But that new draw cycle, it's so nice. Like at what point when you went to check them out? Because I know you checked out the RX3 a couple years ago, and you decided against it. But with this Ventum, at what point were you like, you know what, I got to have this?
Well, you get to a point, and I can't really explain what point it is when you feel like you've grown past your bow and you're ready to kind of just start afresh, maybe because you feel like you're in a leg, maybe you had a couple mishaps in the tree, or maybe you missed something, or maybe you wounded something with it, or whatever that may be, where you get kind of pushed to look in the direction to a new bow. And I was kind of skeptical when I watched that first commercial that Hoyt put out for their RX5 and Ventum 30. The fancy one with all the techno music and where they explain all the new features that come on the new bows, the new shortstop
Mhm.
stabilizer, the sidebar mount and all these different things, the HBX cams. Um, and that video, I was kind of a little bit stumbled on it, but then I got to really thinking, I'm like, maybe this is the year, because I kind of was waiting for a year where Hoyt kind of put a lot of things together. It's like buying a video game or a new vehicle, or really anything. They're consecutive year after year after year, but not a lot of years do they actually come up with a whole lot of new, a new input in the product. A lot of years, sometimes it's just it's a new truck with, different colored seats, or a new truck with a new headlight. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like it's not like that truck's a complete new truck, but in this case, the Hoyt bow, it is pretty much a brand new Hoyt bow. Like it's not like the Hoyt bows that come before it. The Helix and all those other, the Axius, all those bows are nothing compared to what the Ventum can do. The incredible dead in hand. I mean, it is dead in hand. When you let that arrow go, you feel not a lick of vibration in your hand after you let that arrow go. Nothing. I literally, my hand is so rock solid. That's why you say you shoot better with the bow, because it doesn't move, man.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It's one of those things where like because I held on to the same carbon element for 10, 11 years and you're waiting for the manufacturer to separate themselves from the rest of the competition. And I feel like this year Hoyt separated themselves from even their previous selves, and they
Mm-hmm.
really stepped up their game on this new system.
And I shot a few different bows. I shot the Bowtech and the Matthews and a couple other different brands of bows, and the RX5, of course, to compare it to the Ventum 30. And like I don't mind any of those brands. I don't mind any of them. But there's just something about the way that Hoyt has their bow put together, the way it feels in your hand, their handle grip, the draw cycle, the smoothness of the dead in hand, everything about the Hoyt. It's my kind of bow. I know a lot of guys that would rather go with something like the V3 with Matthews. That's a great bow. I'll show it. It's an awesome bow. But where it actually come down to really making the difference when I did decide to purchase the Ventum, I got to the archery lane, and he let me shoot quite a few rounds out of both the Ventum 30 and the V3. And I thought to myself, let's put a more situational application into the mix here. Let's shoot from my knees. So I
Mhm.
decided to start shooting from my knees and start to, really slowly draw the bow, like inch by inch, man, so that you could feel that full draw cycle. You're imagining you're in a canola field with a monster mealy buck, 40 yards, whatever it may be. And this is the moment. If you screw this up because you can't draw slow enough, or you can't get your bow pulled back in a small movement fashion, or whatever it may be, and that Hoyt Ventum, man, it drew like butter.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it for me. I was actually kind of on the fence. Do I choose the V3 or the Ventum? Because the V3 is a fast, smooth bow as well, but it's not as dead in hand, and it is not as smooth to draw.
See, and like not just the draw cycle, but like going back to how you said it felt better to you because you like the feel of the Hoyt bow. For anybody listening that would be on the fence about whether or not they should buy it, we do have a little bit of bias because we've always shot Hoyt, so we're used to the feel of a Hoyt. Not that we're like, oh my goodness, there's a new Hoyt, I have to have it, because we're not like that. We've only bought a couple of different Hoyt bows. You did try out all the other ones because you wanted to see what felt best in your hand. You're familiar with the feel of the Hoyt, but when it all came down to it, the draw cycle and these other little things are really what pushed you to wanting to make the purchase. And that's everybody else. The best advice would be for them to go and check everything out themselves as well.
I agree. And Hoyt did a really good job with the HBX cam. That really was, to me, the defining difference between every year that they've had up until now.
Yeah, I agree. So the topic that we're going to talk about today on the podcast is going to be stand placement. Now we're going to primarily talk about deer hunting. We're going to mostly be on tree stands or somehow getting elevated off the ground. And having it being mostly about whitetails, you just checked the trail cameras today that we have set out for deer.
Mm-hmm.
And you're starting to see that the deer are they're getting a little bit more patternable. Not only that, but you're starting to see deer more and more out and about.
Yeah, no, for sure. Actually, a really big thing that just changed in that southern zone that we hunt for whitetails. It's kind of central southern Alberta is kind of where I would class it compared to where we hunt our other spots. But in that zone, they actually just opened in the regulations 2 doe tags.
Yeah, that's a
Now
game changer.
that used to be open 10 years ago. Now, I'm not saying the deer population isn't good enough to support doe tags. It is. But the problem is it's not good enough to support the entire population of the city of Edmonton, or the entire population of the city of Calgary, all shooting 2 does at the same time in the same zone, because that's like one of the only zones that gets opened for, dual doe tags. It's going to be, I'm for harvesting does. I'm for managing your herd, but I am really skeptical about how that doe season is going to shape the deer population over the next year or two. That's not to say Slager Outdoors isn't going to put does on the ground. We will, but it's all within the proper conservation amount. If we have an area where we know we can take does and it won't hurt our population in the long run, we're definitely going to do it. But also on that same note, after checking the cam, we have tons of does on it, of course, but lots of fawns, lots of the little ones with the spots on them. It's great to see the fawns coming up. But actually, it was July 31st. I got the first picture of a mature buck since it had to be back in early June, man.
Yeah, I think I'd have to look back at the dates. I sent you the picture of that one buck that reappeared. And last I got pictures of him, I think was the last week of June or a week from the end of June. And then before that, I think it was 2 weeks. So probably, yeah, the start of June since we even had any good mature bucks on camera.
And this is the craziest thing. And if you're listening to this right now, you got to really pay attention to how this deer is behaving. We've had pictures of him on this exact trail last year. We found his shed on this trail on the other side of a road this year. And this year he's a very habitual buck. He lives in the same corridor. He's got the same group of trees. These aren't huge properties. These are 80, max 160 acre properties. Lots of them with no bush on them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this buck's living in a really tight area with not a lot of bush or cover. And he's pretty hard to find, but I think we're going to pattern him and lock him down this year. As long as we can keep our does in the area, which I think we can with the crops that are close by, I think we should have no problem. As long as we wait this buck out, we'll get him. Because last year he was a beautiful 5x5 and he had a split on his G3 on, I believe it was his right side. And this year he's a really nice 5x5 with a split on his G2 on it would be his left side.
Yeah.
And so that would make him a 5x6, of course, both years, but he's a mainframe 5x5. Beautiful buck. I don't know what he would score
He's
I'm
not
gonna say just
astronomically bigger from last year either.
no, like our gene pool is not great. And if you watch on Slager Outdoors, we did a few live episodes there back in early spring, kind of February, March, April area. You'll see that we bring up a lot of deadheads, a lot of sheds of many bucks from that specific area. And the genetics just aren't there to always grow as big bucks. But I don't care who you are, or at least for my sake, if I see a 140 coming in, I'm about ready to fling every arrow in my quiver.
Absolutely. And we even found that one deadhead, and I passed on that buck a year prior with my bow, came to full draw.
Mm-hmm.
I put it right on the money, and I was like, you know what? I just think he could use an extra year. And I ended up shooting a third buck that was in that bachelor group. I didn't even realize he was there yet when I was at full draw on this younger buck. And his genes from that year to the next year when we found a deadhead, it was pretty much the same deer.
Yeah, I know, and it's incredible. It's actually this deer that we're talking about that we have pictures of. He's almost the same deer, except for that split, that one split. Everything, every formation, the length of his tines, his frame, the way his beams curl. It's incredible how exactly the same he is, other than he changed his split from the right G3 to the left G2.
Yeah. And it's much, much bigger this year, that split.
Yeah, yeah, no, he's an impressive deer. He might go 140, might go 145. I wouldn't say much more than that, and he might hit 150. We'll never, don't know until you get him on the ground.
So then, other than what we're getting on those cameras, you're starting to see some pretty good sized bachelor groups of bucks as well.
Yeah, yeah. So in the spot where I harvested my buck on camera last year in October, man, I don't know if it's hard because that area is extremely difficult to pattern the deer because the fields are considerably larger. They can be miles by miles, man. And if you have
Mhm.
a mile and a half of bush line that's perfect for a whitetail to come out of, good luck pinpointing him down to 60 yards. But I have seen some bucks, man, that I don't know,
Because on that
really,
hunt,
really,
you had a really nice buck, much bigger than the one you shot out in the field.
yeah.
And he was just playing around with the does, doing what deer typically do. And then would you say it was all luck that the buck you shot came out and came right across you? Or would you say that you kind of expected some deer, whether it was that one or another one, to make that move?
You know, whenever you call, the success rate of calling isn't terrible, but it's never that great, especially when you blind call. And I was sight calling that buck, but really I was blind calling the buck I called in. And I
Mhm.
had seen the buck that I shot. He cruised about 300 yards parallel with me every single night for a couple nights. And so it wasn't that it was happen chance that that buck was there. He was cruising that line consistently every single night, but I hadn't spotted him because I was paying so much attention to this other good buck that was in the field that I didn't know he was actually out. And it was actually Spencer running the camera that spotted this buck. And I remember I grunted at that other buck a few times, no bleeded at him once or twice, and he kind of took off across the field to go check out another patch of bush for does or scrapes or whatever he was up to that night. And I remember I told Spencer, I'm like, let's just give it. We have, about 10 minutes left of legal light. And I'm just like, let's just give it 5 more minutes, just sit here real quietly. Not gonna act like we're getting down to nothing, just gonna hunt seriously for at least 5 more minutes. And then, man, it must not have been 60 seconds. And Spencer had looked up and he's like, Ryan, there's an animal 100 yards up the fence. I looked up, man, and I was like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah. And I think that something that really aided you in the success of that hunt is that you did something that a lot of people tend to overlook, in the fact that when you see a big deer or a group of deer or any animal and they're all out in one spot out in an opening, you pay more attention to where they are and what they are than where they came from and how they got there. And you
Mm-hmm.
paid attention to where these deer were coming from so that you could ambush them.
Yep, exactly. And that was a hard hunt that I played. I moved that tree stand. I would say about a 900-yard wide field edge that specific one is, and then there's about another 800-yard one that runs kind of in an L shape. And so there's a lot of area for those whitetails to come out of. So when you're trying to pinpoint them down to specific corners or coves or fence lines or gate openings or whatever it may be, a hole in the fence where a tree fell on it, wherever they focus their travel movements, it's hard. I hunted many nights in different areas on that field, different tree stand setups, and it was 6 nights in a row that I hunted to get that buck out of that same tree. Then it was hard because I didn't have a camera guy. I'm guilty of not being able to videotape everything, just like everybody else is. If I would
Mhm.
have had a camera with me every night, it would have been a different story than that one night. We had great movement all night, but I sat there many, many nights before that where I see nothing.
Yeah. And even if you did have something come out and you're trying to self-film that hunt that we have on Slager Outdoors of you and Spencer in Alabama, Spencer proves how difficult it is to self-film yourself with a bow. And even if it is right inside of 30 yards.
Yeah, it's extremely hard if they do not give you ample time. Now, look, if you were sitting over a nice, candy corn bait, or, you're in Saskatchewan sitting over a lush green alfalfa square bale, it's different because if the buck stops for you, you have all day to press record. Okay, I'm on him, range, draw your bow,
Let
shoot
them
the deer.
settle down.
Exactly. You can get away with that luxury. You can't do that in Alberta. You couldn't do it in Alabama the way we were hunting. You can bait in Alabama. We didn't hunt over baits.
No, you didn't. Even in Alberta, we're primarily setting up on trails, maybe a big wide open food source. We very rarely hunt off of bedding areas or between bedding areas. That's something I think we found more success doing in the rifle seasons.
Mm-hmm.
But with a bow, it's largely figuring out where these deer are traveling in their rut, pre-rut, and feeding cycles, and we try to figure out a way to set up a stand that works best for that.
My favorite time to hunt whitetail deer with a bow is that first week to first 2 weeks of season. When you can get them in that summer feeding pattern, they are by far, you will get 6, 7, 8-year-old bucks, man, more vulnerable in that first week of bow season than you will in the entire rut.
And I think you can also kind of attribute that to if they're in velvet, because it seems like when a buck's in velvet, they're just nutrition, nutrition, nutrition. And then as soon as they strip their velvet, they're like, okay, shelter and hide.
Mm-hmm. And then the next opportunity you get, so you go from that early season and then you move up into that pre-rut. And in Alberta, when you got daylight hours dwindling so fast, that pre-rut is such a hard window to hit. Last year, I would say it was anywhere between like October 17th to 25th, because I shot one on the 19th. I seen pre-rut movement for a few days before that. Spencer shot one on the 25th doing pre-rut activity as well.
And it was one of those infamous trickle ruts, and it was very difficult to pinpoint movement.
Yeah, if I didn't get that buck on October 19th, I highly doubt I would have ever got a chance at a buck with my bow after that.
Yeah. Now, you were saying first couple of weeks of season, we have one spot that you set up a tree stand, and I don't remember why you set one up there. I think it was maybe just to see how it went. And you and I have killed 3 bucks in 3 consecutive years in that stand. The year prior of last would have been the last time that we shot one in there, just because I don't think we even had time to sit there that first week of October last year. But
Yeah.
all 3 of our bucks died within 5 days of each other.
Yeah, it's an incredible spot, man. It's a habitual crossing spot for good whitetail bucks. They're there every single year. And I'll actually tell you the story of how I actually found that spot. So I was sitting about 300 yards further up. So there's kind of a road, an old dirt kind of private, road allowance, kind of thing where young kids go in Baja, try and get some mud on their tires kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's 2 80-acre patches of bush on either side. And these deer like to cross it. And there's a field on the one side, on our side that we're hunting. And it kind of goes off the end. It's kind of like a slim rectangle there with the bush pattern. And I was hunting about 300 yards further up from the edge. And I was kind of on a creek. And for some reason, I couldn't get on the deer, man. I was hunting all September, hunted probably 20 days, September 1st to about the 20th, hunted hard. Couldn't get on deer, man. Maybe a forkhorn, maybe a doe. But at that time, I wasn't interested in shooting a forkhorn or a doe because we didn't have doe tags. And one night I get out of my stand because I'm all antsy in my pants and I want to walk up to the field just to see what's in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I got right to the edge of the field and I had a buck come across on the road, right where that tree stand goes in. Like we're about 100 yards in off the main road, there, that little main dirt road.
Mm-hmm.
And that buck crossed perfectly right in front of me. And I watched him walk in there and I was like, you know what? Just gauging by how these deer are moving, I'm like, I bet you they're crossing through right there on that trail. And sure enough, man, I put a tree stand up there. It was September 28th. Put that tree stand up on the 27th. I hunted on the 28th. I remember I had a fever. I was sick as a dog. This is before COVID. This is before anyone cared if you were even sick.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting in the tree stand, sweating my butt off, man. And all of a sudden, this truck I could hear it, coming up this dirt road, and all of a sudden 2 whitetail bucks come flying into my side. I was like, oh man, this is it. And you think they're gonna stop in the opening or just before they get to it. Man, they blew clean through that opening like it was standing still. They go like 50, 75 yards on the other side. They're standing in the trees, and all of a sudden this coyote puts up. And I let out this like fawn bleat, and that coyote started running. I could hear these coyotes start running towards us, and it spooked those bucks back at me. And I come to full draw, and he come running out into the open, and I yelled at him. He stopped at 30 yards, and I hit him. I hit him a little bit high. It actually knocked him down in his tracks. It was right behind the shoulder, and I was fairly high. I like to put my tree stands, in that 24 to like 26-foot range. That's kind of like my favorite sweet spot. But if I can get over 20, that's sufficient. And I don't like going over 30. But I made a good shot. He went down. He got back up, ran 100 yards, and it was over. Got a double lung on him. Spencer came, helped me find him. That was it was an awesome buck. He scored 123. Couldn't have been happier.
And before last year, that was your biggest buck with a bow, wasn't it?
Yep, that was. And that buck didn't have a lot of mass, but he had really great length. And just the caliber of story I can tell with that hunt, on that property, it's extremely difficult to kill deer. And the fact that you have killed 2 in succession after me, it's incredible. So I killed that deer on September 28th. When did you kill your bucks?
I killed one, I think it was October 2nd, and the other was October 5th.
It's incredible, man. Like 1 week, that's all it takes. It's that 1 week. Those bucks are just patterned in there.
Yeah, it was incredible because the first one that I shot in there would have been, was that the year after you killed yours?
Yep.
Or something like that. And I missed a buck the night before. And this actually dates back to I think it's my second podcast where I talked about buck fever. And this was the hunt that got me over the hump of, for some reason, I was frozen with a bow. And I missed this buck at 20 yards. And, looking back at it, yeah, absolutely, I should have missed because I wasn't anchored properly. My bow was probably at like a 45-degree angle coming out of the tree sideways because I was trying to lean around a branch and get a shot off. I don't even know where the arrow went. Never did find it. Even with a lighted knock, it sunk so deep into the grass that I still haven't found it. And then the next night, a buck came out, did the same thing as the buck I missed. And I read the situation differently and didn't wait for him to get too far. Took a slightly quartering 2 shot. And yeah, like you said, didn't run very far, found him. We even gave him a little bit of time because the blood hadn't started. And right where we had left blood, when we came back later, that was when he started gushing it everywhere.
I remember when you had made the shot and we had talked about it and we went back in there, and believe it or not, Spencer seems to be with every one of these recoveries. It's hilarious. Awesome. Spencer is just always the man for the job. And I remember I seen the little specks of blood where he first hit him. And I remember once I seen that first patch of frothy, milky,
bubbles.
Red, bubbly blood. I was like, Tyler, we got this deer. We got this deer. Like he's going to be like right here. And he was.
I remember you were leading way and you stopped and you looked back at me and I was like, he's right in front of you, isn't he? And sure enough, that buck was laying there. And then he wasn't even a big deer. I was so proud of that deer. I still am. I look at that deer and I'm like, you know what? I accomplished something for myself by taking this deer. It, to me, is as big as the deer I shot the next year, just like figuratively, even though the inches are significantly different. But yeah, the next year I went in there, I think I sat 3 times. And the third night, I hadn't even seen a deer. The third night I sat there, I think we saw 8. Isaac was with me. And this buck came out and he looked big and mature and I shot him. And he went and he died probably in the same spot as the other deer.
Yeah, as both other bucks, they all come out in the same spot. You hit them in the same spot and they all die in the same spot. It's incredible.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. And I think that deer dressed out at like 100, almost 150 pounds at the butcher in the first week of October.
That was a really nice buck. And like we said, they don't always get huge antlered in that area, but that was a really mature, really beautiful buck.
And he scored that spot. He scored 132 and change. I think 132 and 5/8. So that goes to show you that not every big buck, or not every mature buck, I should say, gets to that 160, 180, 200 inch class. It's just not possible all the time.
No, and that's where, that specific stand, as we're talking about stand placement, there's no big trees in that particular spot. So the tree that I was in there, I want to say we're right at about that 20-foot level.
I want to say that that tree has gotten safer since we've put stand in there because it's
Yep.
starting to get bigger and bigger over the years.
It's grown a lot, and thank goodness for that. But what I did to take advantage of that low height was that, I had to make sure the wind was perfect. We're
Mhm.
predominantly a west wind, so I wanted to make sure I was as
Now
far
we
to the
get a
south
little
of them.
bit messed up with wind in that spot, but the fact that we go so high helps our wind kind of go over top of the trees.
Yep, if you can get above the tree level and the thermals can work to your advantage, you can lots of times blow your wind above the area that you're hunting. And if you can get away with that, you can pretty much hunt any wind. But in that spot, in order to stay hidden at that height, I made sure I left a ridiculous amount of branches around us.
Mhm.
Actually, so difficult that it would be really hard to videotape, which we have never actually videotaped a deer out of that stand,
No, not
which
yet.
is probably a large reason because I had it so brushed in. And it just allows you to get away with that movement, drawing your bow, um, grabbing your bow, whatever it may be, looking around. When you're low like that, you need ample cover in order to give you that advantage.
Well, because the bucks come into that spot and they have no idea what in the world's going on. The does come in and the first thing they do is look straight up your tree.
Yeah, exactly.
And another good point to touch on is access. Now, when you set up a tree stand or any sort of a stand tripod, whatever you got going on, it's really important that you don't cross where these animals are going to be coming in because they're going to catch your scent and they're going to be like, yeah, no, I'm not going in there today. Or they're going to
Hmm.
do a big loop around and then completely avoid you. That spot works out really well because our access point is up that old dirt road
Hmm.
where they're used to being not danger, but the smells that they can associate with danger are always there temporarily. And so
On
they
the
come
road.
out, yeah, they come out and they're like, okay, we just want to get across. So we go up there, cut around the backside, and then come into the trail. And that seems to work out really well in our favor because unless a deer comes in on that backside, they have no idea that we're there.
Yeah, no, we seem to be able to fool them with that spot. And it's like sheep hunters when they have a ram hole, that's a buck hole.
Yeah, it seems
And
to
it's
be every
just
year.
that's one you don't give it up, man. Because even last year, I remember we did go in there. I believe it was one day last year. We got close. We got
Yeah,
really
we
close.
did.
We had that really nice buck with the split G3. He came in there that night, and we come close, but we just no cigar.
And if I was shooting like I am now with this new Ventum, I might have tried something that night. But we
Yeah,
just, I don't know. I think what we tried to do is we tried to rely on calling him over and he just wasn't interested. And that's for a whole nother podcast topic, but sometimes they just don't bite.
yeah.
Now, when you're looking for a place to set up a stand, what are you looking for? Are you looking for thick vegetation? You looking for real thin stuff? Are you looking for
I
trails?
really, I really like to hunt pinch points, spots where the deer would naturally funnel through. And now, when I say naturally, I do include stuff like fence lines, open gates, things like that. Anything that makes a deer want to travel through a specific area. So, in one particular situation, I was hunting this patch of bush. It's only about 15 acres large. It's surrounded on all four sides by field, all four sides. There's not a specific reason why a deer would want to go into one field to the next, other than maybe he wants wheat this night, maybe he wants canola or peas the next night. Nothing. And there's even alfalfa on one side. So it's literally a smorgasbord. You just have to pick and go. Yeah. And there's this one spot where this fence line comes up and it kind of tees off to another fence. But pretty much everywhere the deer would have to go, he'd have to jump multiple fences except for this one spot.
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, if I was a deer, this is where I would be. So I sat on them about a mile away on a road with my glass, and I was glassing this spot, and I watched three nice bucks come out of that spot. And I was like, well, that seals it for me. I'm going to go in there and put a stand. And the next night I did in that afternoon, sat there that night and I shot a nice buck.
You almost didn't.
Yeah, it was funny. I had this buck coming through and I'm like, man, that looks like a really big buck. And he got under me. And he was a nice deer. He scored 100 and I believe it was 116 inches. It's a nice deer. It's a really good deer with your bow,
Nice four
and
by four.
yeah, really nice, solid 4x4. Not a lot of length, so that's why he didn't score high. He had good mass and good width, but just not a high scoring deer. And he come through the trees with this other buck, and I grabbed my bow and I'm like, should I do it? And I thought to myself, you know what? this is a gift horse. This buck is at like 18 yards. He's fully broadside. Doesn't have a clue in the world that I'm even in the bush with him.
Hmm.
And I come to full draw and I'm like, you know what? I'm taking this deer. And I did. And I could not be happier that I did, because I hit that deer and it was like 6 seconds and it was over. He
Yeah.
ran out to the field edge, ran back up the fence line into the bush, and he was dead, all in like 50 yards. It was incredible, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's one of those things where you wish you had a camera, because when you don't, that's when the picture perfect scenarios roll out. Um, now, for somebody who doesn't want to shoot too far, because a lot of whitetail hunters, they want to keep everything inside of 40 yards, even 30 yards, which is totally understandable. If you're not comfortable with the shot, don't take it. But
Mm-hmm.
you find a trail, the deer are frequently crossing, you can get in the bush. Like, how far are you setting up off that trail? How far can you get away with being off that trail?
The max I will push myself from a trail is generally 30 or 40 yards. But the only case where I will push it longer is if I have a heavy trail and I feel like there's about a 90% chance that my deer are going to come out on that trail. And there's another trail that's like 70 yards away. I'll put myself 20 yards from the major trail and about 50 yards from the secondary trail, because that major trail is everything. If you can get that 20-yard money shot, that poker chip shot, that's the one I'm going to take every time. The secondary trail, that's just your fallback. I'm comfortable personally up to 50 yards on a deer. Depending on how I was shooting at the given time, 60 would be my max. 60 is the max I would take on any deer, mule deer or white. Um, just given that their body size, the comfort, the kind of groups I can put together on the target, how comfortable I am with my shooting at the time, is I'll vary my range 10 yards.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that's really important is you don't want to be on top of that trail.
No, you don't want to be 4 or 5 yards. You don't want to be on a tree where he can smell your tree stand from the trail either.
No, exactly. Because if you're right on top of the trail, like you said, the scent is a huge thing, because you had to get there somehow. The deer is going to come across where you are. And if it's coming from an area you're not expecting, there's a good chance that they're going to catch your scent and blow out before you even get a chance at a shot. And the same thing kind of goes for food. You're going to set up on, say, a field edge where these animals are coming in to eat, because this is very popular. Even down in the south, everybody grows their food plots. The deer are
Mm-hmm.
typically going to be as close to the bush as possible. As the night goes on and it gets darker, they're more comfortable going out further.
Of course.
But you also want to factor in, okay, they're kind of in this area. Let's find a spot where maybe they got a trail that comes into the field. If you're not going to intercept them on the trail, you might get them once they calm down and start feeding.
Yeah, yeah, that's so, like in an area like that, I would set myself up in a nice cove. So if you had like a specific part of a field where it kind of dug into the trees, you get a nice little, like, half moon dish, like a little cove or even a corner, like a corner of a field. Those are dynamite places to be, because that's a natural funnel. Deer feel safe. They have lots of cover on multiple sides rather than just coming out of a straight flat field edge.
Yeah.
And this is actually something I want to touch on, just to, because deer are so good at throwing a wrench in the plans. When
mhm.
I had that buck come out last year that I shot with my bow, I was hunting a gate. That's where the trail was. They were coming through this open gate, and that gate was about 40 yards. And where they could come out in the field, if they came out in a 45, it'd be about 30 out of the tree stand. And that's why I had my tree stand there. I was just far enough that I didn't think I was going to bug them, but I was still in the wheelhouse for myself. That buck come all the way up the fence line towards it. He only had 10 more yards to get to that gate. What did he do? He jumped the fence.
Yeah.
He didn't even care about that gate. So the very thing that I was hunting, he threw the biggest monkey in the plan. You know what I mean? That just goes to show, even as carefully as you can plan, deer can still throw a wrench in your plans and surprise you.
And see, that could have been too because you called and he was on a mission to get to what that call was. Now, under the same breath, he might have not even come that direction had you not called. So it's one of
Mm-hmm.
those situations where it could have worked out, it couldn't have worked out, but luckily for you, the deer just read the script that night. Um, Now another thing we touched on height of tree stands. You like that 20 to 26 range. Uh, a lot of people aren't comfortable getting to that height, but I recommend it. I've had so much success sitting in some of your stands, as difficult as they can be to get into. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that also kind of correlates with stand type. Like a lot of people are going out there, they're getting a ladder stand, and these ladder stands are good for like 12 feet, 14 feet.
15 max. Like if you want the big XL, you get 15.
Yeah, and not only are they not getting you very high, but they're an eyesore. So if you go and set up in a spot, and we're trying to get into the habit of setting up as close to sitting as possible.
Mm-hmm.
If you go into a spot and the deer are coming in there frequently, and you put up this giant ladder stand, it's a triple seater, whatever you want to call it, the Hawk Denali, and a deer comes in, not only is he going to see you up in the tree, but he's going to see this monstrosity attached to the tree, and he's going to be like, what in the world is going on in my living room?
It's like when little Timmy shows up to the family gathering with a giant pimple on his cheek. Everybody notices. It's
that's
not
a
normal.
that's a
Everybody
great
sees
one.
little Timmy's giant red pimple. So that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Now we like to use sticks, those 3-step ladders that you can individually clip onto the tree, and pegs, because it gets you that height. They're nice and compact, and not only that, they are so much more simple. If your stand needs to be moved on the fly, you're not monkeying around
Mhm.
with this gigantic set of ladders and all these
They are
pins that
so
are banging
loud.
around. And
Yeah.
and not only that, like you're trying to haul it is in as few pieces as possible, because you don't want to make so many trips. You're banging and
Yep.
clanging off of everything on the way there. Whereas with pegs and sticks, you just pop them out, unscrew them from the tree. If it's allowed where you're hunting, in Alberta, we're allowed to use whatever we want. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can just throw it in your backpack, run down the field edge or the trail or wherever in the world you're hunting, and just put it back up quickly.
Yep. My favorite thing about sticks, so sticks would be the way to go. If I could do it any way, any sort, sticks, but that's an expensive way to do it a lot of the times. Each stick could be really pricey, but a peg, so is the poor man's stick. But in this case, pegs and sticks can go up any type of tree. Sometimes you don't even need a saw. Sometimes you don't even need a straight tree. It can curl and bend and twist whatever direction you want. If you're trying to put like a hard, set of ladders, they need a fairly straight stinking tree for you to be able to go up that whole tree without feeling like you're going to fall out and die. But
As
those
long as
pegs
you
and
can
sticks,
maneuver it, you can get it in there.
exactly. If you can climb that tree, pegs and sticks will get you there.
Now, we've also used a combination. So, like, if you get up to a point in the tree where you're like, you know what, I need that extra 6 feet or that extra 8 feet, and
You
you
got a
got
couple
sticks
pegs
all
in
the
your
way up there.
backpack.
Exactly. You throw those in
Yep.
there, you get up to your stand. You're like, I got all the visibility I need now. I got that angle, that shot line. It
And
really helps.
when you're in a tree and you forget a bow hanger and you got an extra peg in your backpack, you're
Awesome.
just like Cotton Eye Joe, man.
Yeah. You're just loving it. Um,
Exactly.
Now, I asked you to think before we did the podcast of poor setups that you've had, or a situation where you're like, oh man, I really should have did something differently. What did you come up with?
I got two that come to mind, and they're from the exact same hunting season. This is when I was starting to get like really big into tree stand hunting, and I didn't know anything about pegs at this point. And we had a good friend of ours, Tim, come up to hunt with us.
Oh, I
He was
remember
hunting for
this.
elk, and I was so gung ho on hunting a deer with my bow out of a tree stand. I was so determined to be a real tree, a bone collector, a jury outdoors. You know what I mean? Like have the exactly what I did last year. I was so gung ho trying to do this, and of course, it took me 4 or 5 years to actually get this to that point. But he had like 6 pegs in his backpack,
Yeah.
and we get up on this wheat field edge, and man, we had like 170-inch 6x7 coming out in this field, and I got like 6 pegs to go up in this tree with. So
How
I
big
get
was
like,
the tree?
man, this tree was probably like 7 inches in diameter. It was not big, but I get like 10 feet up in this tree, and I'm sitting in this tree stand. And the farmer, I remember I sat the one night, nothing come out. Like you're so low to the ground, man. A deer could be walking through the trees. At 70 yards, if he can catch a glimpse of the field edge, he sees this big retard moving around 10 feet off the
Just
ground.
a
He ain't
candy
coming in.
cane.
Exactly. It's like, what in the world is going on out here? And I remember the one night I sat in there and this farmer goes by in his swather. He's swathing the field. I was pretty much eye level with the farmer in his swathier cab. And at that point, I was like, you know what, this tree stand is not going to work out. So I moved it to a different spot. And actually, this tree stand setup was kind of interesting. Me and you had gone in there, and I was jumping off of the box rail of the truck and jumping onto trees to break shooting lanes.
I remember that.
And in that particular case, I had like, I think, what was it, 3 or 4 ladder sticks.
Mm-hmm.
I think 12, 15 feet max is what I got off the ground. And it was the same thing, man. I get right to dark, and I had this incredible 5x5 whitetail buck come out 150 inches if he was an inch. And he came out in front of me, and at 12 feet off the ground, there was no hiding. There was no hiding that I was there. He picked me out right away. You know, he busted, and that was the first chance I could have ever had at a big mature whitetail, and I just couldn't make it happen.
And especially with deer, because deer tend to be the most common animal to look straight up your tree.
Yeah, and in that case, really, in both those cases, it's the height that came into effect the most. The wind direction was good for the most of both of them. It's the height I have noticed kills you. If
Yeah.
you are not high enough off the ground, it absolutely kills you.
Yeah, that's where finding your wind is the best case scenario for success. If you can find a spot where you got a vantage point on a trail or a food source, or even water, if you can set it up so that your wind is always in your favor, you're in the money every time. And then couple that with the height of the tree stand, you get over that certain height. And if you have a marginal wind, maybe the thermals take and push your wind up higher over top of the animals that are coming in. And that's just a great way to find success using stands. One other question I got for you, kind of a curveball. Have you seen these tree saddles or saddle stands, saddle hunters, whatever?
I'm actually guilty. I looked on Amazon the other day at them because I thought to
That
myself,
one.
maybe that would be the way to go. But I don't know. I'm more of a, if I were to go with something like that, I think I would probably go with like a really light lone wolf, because I used one in Alabama that the outfitter there had for us. And that was the most versatile. It didn't have any ratchet straps on it, just had a couple straps that hooked up on it. You couldn't knock them off, like most straps where they have the self tighteners on them.
Yep.
You walk down the field edge and you lose one.
Yeah.
This one, it was hooked up, it was well done, and it was so light you could throw it on your backpack. It was a special type of material, like a composite, made no noise, didn't tink, did nothing. And so that's probably the direction I would go instead of a tree stand saddle, just because I'm probably biased to tree stands.
I don't know how a guy can stand on something that's not even barely as wide as his 2 feet together and then sit on the saddle itself, man. I feel like my butt would go numb and I'd lean too far back and get in a really hairy situation.
And given the adversity of weather that we have in Alberta, I don't think that it's just a practical option, not in -30.
No, if you're hunting in early September, even late September, early October, you can take it in anywhere. It might be excellent.
Yeah,
But those
exactly.
later months, man, that would be absolutely miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we've been going on for a little while now. I think we'll wrap it up. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're extremely busy lately, and it's only going to get busier in the coming weeks and months here.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to hopefully connect and we'll get to do some hunting together and even see how your success is, I guess, on your own. We're going to try our very best to get everything on camera this year. I know you and I are working on a really special bow hunt here in October. Spencer might be coming along. We might have another person coming along as a camera guy. Lots of stuff planned. For those that are listening, we hope that you got something out of our input on how we like to set up our stands. Any questions, always you can ask us. You can follow Slager Outdoors at Slager Outdoors on Instagram and Facebook. I think you can find it that way on Facebook as well. You can follow the podcast and myself at On the Blood Trail, Instagram, Facebook as well. Follow and subscribe to both YouTube channels for Slager Outdoors, On the Blood Trail. That's going to be your best way to get to see how we're doing in our success for the season. And you get to watch all the extra content that we put out there, listen to some of the old podcasts, all the new stuff that's coming out. Fantastic. And Yeah, I don't. Did I miss anything, or is there anything else you wanted to add before we were done?
No, if anyone finds success in the field and you guys want to share your story with us, we're more than happy to listen and to take in whatever you guys have done right and apply it to what we are doing.
Exactly. There's always something that you can learn. If hunters thought they could never learn or do something differently to be better, we wouldn't be buying new bows, trying new broadheads, changing up stuff with arrows, trying a new deer call,
Exactly.
elk call. We love to play, and that's part of what makes hunting so exciting. Uh,
Every season is a learning curve.
exactly.
So
But thanks again, Ryan. So excited that we were able to get this put together here with such a tight timeline. And thanks to everybody for listening. And we'll see you on the next podcast.